Thank you for being with us once again. We are here to look at data visualization. With a spreadsheet, we have a means of displaying data graphically, visually. So there are various tools for that, as we are going to see. So the spreadsheet allows the analyzer to summarize complex data into a more meaningful way, visual way, at a glance view. So here tools can be used. For example, the graph, what we here we call the charts, but graph in ordinary speech, we have map charts, dashboards, pivot tables, and pivot charts. So as explained, we have the graphs, we have pivot tables and pivot charts. Then we have map charts. We are going to see each one over time. So meet me on those channels. Send me a WhatsApp message on that line. And that's my telephone contact. These are my names: Bossa Eric Ronald, your tutor for ICT. Please don't forget to subscribe the channel. The channel provides quizzes. So in the comment section, find a link, tap it to test yourself in a learning area. So data visualization, as already explained, we have pivot tables, what we are going to look at. So a way of summarizing data for reporting so that the analyzer can recognize patterns in the data or trends or connect one thing to another. And it uses features like subtotals, filter, and sort, among others. Then from the pivot tables, we can develop the pivot chart, and it graphically displays data. The summarized data, the data that has been summarized in the pivot table is displayed graphically, is displayed visually in the pivot chart. Then we have the map charts that help display data across geographical regions. In other words, here we must have something that has to deal with a place or a country name, for example, and the data is related to the data from the graph, from the spreadsheet rather. The source data is used to show regions, geographical regions, as we are going to see. For example, if you have country names and their populations, we can display it in a graphical manner using a map chart. We are going to see all that. So we have pivot tables, as it were. We are going to use sales data to display the pivot table. So with the data, we select the data range. This is massive data, but it can be summarized in the pivot chart, as we are shortly going to see. So when you drag over the data range as a means of selecting, we go on the Insert tab, the spreadsheet. We're using Microsoft Excel. Then in the Insert tab, we have tables at the extreme left, and then choose Pivot Table. The screen tip is explaining to you who can arrange and summarize complex data in a pivot table. So this data that is in the worksheet is summarized for easy at a glance view. So when I activate by clicking, dialog appears, create pivot table, and the data range has already been selected. So it shows up where there's a provision to select the data range. We are not using an external source because we already have the data within. Then we choose where to direct the pivot chart. That's going to summarize the data. Where should it be directed? Should we have it on a new worksheet or an existing worksheet? Let's try having it on in the current worksheet, the existing worksheet for that matter. Then we select where location. Where do you want the pivot chart to fall? So here I drag over the area where I wish the chart to fall. So when I do that, it gives me provision to create the pivot chart. So I go to confirm, and then the field dialog, the field pane shows here. So these are called fields, rate, product category, items. That's the language of database. Each collected item is in a field. Customer is a field. Item specification, that's a field. So here in the pivot table field dialog, the pane allows us to select which fields. So because we already selected the data range, by default, the system shows us the fields they are in. So the fields are as displayed that correspond to what we have in the data source. So you have customer field as displayed here, the item specifications, product category, all these are the fields. So here we have a checkbox by them, and when you tick the checkbox, you are permitting to show that field in your pivot table. You may not choose to show all, but select, and the selection is done by ticking the checkbox beside the field name. So when I tick the checkbox. For example, customer, we are using the customer field. When I tick the checkbox, the table is created, starts being created. Now this one shows me the customer names. They are repetitive, but they are summarized here. They appear once, while here they are repetitive from the data source. So here they are summarized. So that's why it is a summarizing tool. So the customers' names are summarized here. Then you can go on to select the items they are purchasing. When we check the checkbox, the customer items appear as a list below each entry of the customer name. As you can see, each customer name has items they have bought appearing after their name. Then you can go on possibly to put the amounts. We have the customer name, the items they have bought. Then you can go on to find the amounts as we see. So here from the data source, we have the customer, the items they have bought as we are showing. We have product category, we have rate, unit price, we have quantity, how much has been bought, and the amounts. These are the fields that we are using. So here in our pivot table, we are summarizing all that, and we are selecting particular fields. So we have selected the customer name, the items they are bought, and then we are going on to track the amounts due to each item bought. So when we check the checkbox, the system takes it further and displays the amounts as well. The customer name, the summation of the amounts, so all the amounts are submitted here for each customer. They are submitted, and then each of the item is displayed. So this is a summarized form of what would be lengthy from the data source. The application summarizes it like that. So we can do a further modification to make things a bit more colorful. So we can have something like that. Then here, so it's sort of a breakdown of what would be voluminous from the data source. All this, but it's broken down here in a summarized fashion. So what can we do with this? We can still trim this down. We can get to just show the customer names, and for each customer, as you can see, there is a checkbox besides the name. When you click it, it collapses the items. And when you click it again, it displays the items bought by each individual customer. So when I click here, I can collapse the items. Gradually, I collapse, and then I only display with the customer names and the summation of the amounts they have bought. So this is the further summarization, showing customer names, but does not show the items purchased. Then here I can choose to show the items, maybe just for some customers. For example, I can show for this while the others are collapsed, or I can show for another while the others. So this is a way of specifying maybe an individual, you're interested in an individual's purchases. So you display your purchases and you collapse those for the others. Then we have a filter tool here. Still, when we activate it, we can select what to display. We can undisplay some entries, confirm. When we undisplay, only what is permitted is what shows, but others have been undisplayed. So here is a checkbox where you choose whether to display that entry or not. So when we check it back, it reappears in the pivot table. So this is what is called pivot table and summarizes data in that way. So when I'm done with it, I can delete it. I select it and choose to delete. Means I've done away with the pivot table. Next, we have the pivot chart. So still in the insert tab, here we have pivot chart among the chart groups. Charts group, we can select and have the pivot chart, or you can have both pivot chart and table done one by one. But here we are going to have the pivot chart. Since we have seen the pivot table alone, then we are also looking at the pivot chart alone. So when I confirm, the dialog shows up like we have seen before. And then we have to select the data range. So we go on to select the data range. You can select the data range before or during when the dialog is appearing. So this one is showing us the data range selected, and then it's not an external source, it's internal. Then we choose where to place the chart. For example, here you can try having the new worksheet. The worksheet tab, when you confirm to have it in a new worksheet, we shall have the worksheet tab here showing of the worksheet automatically created. So when we confirm that, then go on to have another worksheet developing. And this is the chart area, because we are going to have a pivot chart. So the chart area shows up, it's blank. You can resize it for visibility. Still, we have the fields, pivot chart fields, the fields that will appear in the pivot chart. Then you can still, once again, select by checking the checkboxes here to have a pivot table appearing by the side of the pivot chart. Then select the other corresponding fields. So here we are being shown the customer entry and then the items bought, and then you can also go to have the amounts. When you select the amounts, they are displayed here, and the pivot chart also displays accordingly. So because this is a chart, then we have to label it. We need to have axes. So this is the title, and the axes are to be labeled vertical and vertical axis and primary axis. So we start with the title. We can label the title. For example, our chart deals with sales data. So that's the title I've chosen. So then you can select the wording to format, do some formatting. So there we have the title. Then you can go on, you can collapse this. Then go on to put the chart elements. The chart elements, for this matter, we are looking at the axis titles. So we have the primary horizontal axis. When we check the checkbox, it provides for it, and we select to rename it. So these are customer names. Then you can format it as well. When you click into it, the screen tip appears, allowing you to format the text. So here we have customer names. And then we also have another chart element. So here we select the chart elements, click within the chart area, and the dialog pops out, and then select, and then axis titles. Horizontal, primary horizontal, and the primary vertical. So just a moment. So here we label the axis 1 for 1, that is labeled. Then we go on to deal with the other also, the vertical axis, activate it, then give it the due. So these are amounts. These are amounts. Then we format. So there we are with a complete pivot chart. And then you can go on to look at its further summarization. We've seen with the pivot table that you can summarize the views. Here we have the tools. Like we saw, they summarize further. You can collapse the entries of the items board. You can collapse them. When you collapse them correspondingly, the chart follows suit and also collapses. Because here, the chart is also showing the details as they appear in the table. What is in the table here is what shows in the chart. You see that we have the different customers by names, and each customer, the items they purchase are shown. There's a thin line here drawing, which is not so visible depending on your medium. So the customer is shown and their items there they have purchased. So when I choose to collapse, for example, this one, I collapse their items. It is all summarized into one, which is a summation of amounts. So when I go on collapsing, correspondingly, the customer has their items collapsed. These ones, their items are being shown, and they are also being reflected in the pivot chart. So when we collapse, we want to collapse them. For each individual where we collapse, it is summarized into the summation of the amounts. So when I collapse this one as well, it means all the entries have their item specifications collapsed. Then this is a summarized way, further summarization of the views. We are only seeing customer names and the summation of the amounts. But then still, when we display back, for example, this one can have their items being shown while the others are collapsed. So it depends on how we want to summarize the data. So still, we have a filter tool here. We can choose to display some entries or display some. When it is checked, it is displayed in the pivot chart. So here, when I go on to uncheck, what I uncheck disappears from the pivot chart. So it follows exactly what is in the pivot table. Since they summarize here, even here it is summarized, we are only showing 2 entries out of the 4. So it is a further summarization. Then when we use the filter tool, we can get them back by checking against the names, and then they reappear, and then they show up as displayed. So that is pivot, the pivot chart and pivot table we have seen earlier. Then we go on to see something else. So we have the map chart that displays data based on geographical selection. So here, our data here is showing countries and their statistics about countries. So we can choose to have maybe a country and population, country versus its population. For example, these are African countries and their corresponding populations. So when I select the data range, as it were, I choose to select some pieces of the data. The population, a country against its population. So here, my data range, I select the country, and because I'm selecting disjointed columns, here I have a country and then the population in this column. I skip a column, country, and then its population. So I'll select the first column, press down the control button. While the control button is pressed down, I select the population column. So that gets me selecting two columns that are disjoint. So when I have selected successfully, I go on the insert feature, and in the insert feature among the chart groups, I have maps. I select map by clicking, and then when I point, when I hover over this icon, the map displays the preview. So when I confirm, the map of map of Africa and the corresponding countries are displayed with a color scale from the country with the highest population to the one with the lowest population, following that color scale. So this color scale is by default, and it may not be appealing, so you may want to modify, to customize the color scale to your taste. So what I do here in the map, within the map, you right click so that you have a dialog that allows you a drop down menu. The menu pops out, and then you can modify the chart. So when I click on format data series, it provides for formatting the series. So the series color can be adjusted. When I select series color, it allows me to make adjustments and provide colors as appropriate. So the minimum lowest value for this case are populations. The lowest population, country with the lowest population, I can choose a color for it. And the country with the highest population, I choose another color for it. So yeah, I can choose which color. For example, I can have a color like this to show countries with the lowest population or countries with lower populations, and while from the higher end, I can also have another color, and each of these countries, the population is shown with a color scale ranging from the highest to the lowest. The values here are populations as from the data source, because the data source is looking at country populations. So there we have the map chart as an example, and the color scale has been modified, and this gets us to having what we call a map chart. So all those are the three ways of visualizing data in a summarized form. So we have seen the pivot table, pivot chart, and map chart. Thank you for viewing us. Keep subscribing to the channel.